So I think that's a really interesting question about trust in the workplace. And I think it's something that TCM work extensively with, and I'd like to maybe just share some of my thoughts and insights around trust. So when we talk about trust in some way immediately means that there is some risk involved. Trust is always about risk. And when we're talking about risk in the workplace, trust is formed where somebody essentially could do something to you, but because of the relationship that you have, chooses not to. So when we talk about risk and what is at stake, it's based around the relationship. And more often than not, what can be harmed is the ongoing sustainable relationship between two people. And what that basically means is that in some way, shape or form, that psychological contract that has been formed and met between those two individuals has been broken or breached in some way. And so as a mediator and working with conflict resolution, a lot of the work that we do is about repairing and restoring that psychological contract. And so we make these agreements or deals or expectations with individuals, with all of our relationships, with strangers, with our friends, with our families, with our loved ones. And the challenge with these psychological contracts and even based around trust is that they're often very covert. They're not openly spoken about. So with a normal, the normal employment contract, you know what your job role is, you know what your salary is, you know what your hours of work are. Our psychological contracts are a little bit more covert, and so because we are not aware of what the terms and conditions are or the fine print, it can be very easily broken. And this is often the realm of a mediator or a conflict resolution specialist will come in. So I think four very key characteristics personally when it comes to discussing about trust is the first one is that trust doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It takes a long time to grow and manifest and be nurtured. So I have a favorite saying is that you can't microwave trust. It's something that has to be built over time involving a long-lasting relationship. And what you'll find is if you think of two individuals, how many times have you met somebody for the first time and then there's this little feeling that says, you know what, something doesn't feel right. I just don't trust that person or that situation. It's probably happened a few times. But many times could you really say that you've met someone and said, immediately, I trust that person? It's a lot rarer because it takes time to grow and build that feeling of trust between two individuals. And what is, and I'm not just saying this as hyperbole or from the school of Jerome Witter. This is backed up by science and neuroscience. The chemical that is responsible for the fostering, building, and maintaining of strong relationships is oxytocin. Oxytocin can be simply broken down as the chemical of love or trust. So how do we maintain trust? Is we ensure that we do acts of service and good deeds. We collaborate and we support each other, and over time, the more oxytocin we get released into our systems and our bodies, the more that feeling of trust is generated and produced. The challenge I find, unfortunately, is that as a counterbalance to the trust chemical, we have the one that we're probably more familiar with in our work environments, which is cortisol, the stress chemical. And the more stressed out that people are, the more selfish they become, the more concerned they are about preserving their own self-interests, and the less open they are to collaborating, supporting, and trusting others. So that's, I think, the first thing from my own experience. The second thing is I think that trust is both rational and emotional. Trust is, you can't just logic someone to trust you. You can't just say, I'm a trustworthy person, trust me. Or trust me, I've got your back. We don't take, the actions speak louder than words, or in this case, feelings speak louder than words. So key things that I think about in terms of my own self-assessment or getting other people to assess how they feel when it comes to trusting their colleagues or people who they mix with is how do you feel thinking about that person? How do you feel when you're around or engaging in a conversation with that person? If you take maybe your line manager or somebody who you work closely with, how do you feel when that person's name is raised? How do you feel when you're engaging in a conversation with them? How do you feel when you don't, when you finish the conversation with these person, all of those feelings and or emotions are indicators as to what is really the driving force behind your behaviors and actions. So in order for trust to become real and manifest, it starts with a feeling of emotion, and then it's often rationalized, like feelings like trust, loyalty, love, and even in some ways respect. All of these things often have an emotional root, and then we rationalize this through our thought processes and also our actions and behaviors. And then the last one, I suppose, is that it has to be reciprocal. So it would be very difficult for there to be true, authentic trust unless it's between both people. So it's very similar to love. If I just love somebody and I'm constantly checking up with them all the time to see how they're doing, if that person loves me back, fine, we're in a committed relationship. If they don't, I'm a stalker. And it's very similar to when we're talking about trust. It has to be a two-way reciprocal relationship between two individuals. So again, if we're looking for authenticity in a trustful relationship, you have to give to receive from both places. And often I find the conflicts that I find myself often mediating is where there seems to be a breakdown of trust maybe on one side of the relationship. And when we talk about trust, what we're really talking about in some ways is the root word of integrity. And when we talk about integrity, we're talking about as in one. Everything is in line in one. People's thoughts, words, and actions. If those three things are in line, we have integrity. If those three things are in line, we have trust. I often find breakdowns in relationships occur because people think one thing, say another thing, and do something completely different. Which means if those two things, or if any of those things are out of kilter, we have a lack of integrity, which will fundamentally lead to a breakdown in trust. And I suppose the last one is that it's different for everybody. What does trust mean? And this is again the realms of a mediator and conflict specialist. What we work with is that if you think back to the psychological contract that I spoke of earlier, is everybody's fine print or terms and conditions are different. So respect means something different to two individuals. Collaboration means something different. Open communication means something different, and so does trust. And so part of our role at TCM and the work that we do with the team here is getting people to engage in an open and adult constructive conversation, but also finding out what's the fine print to the psychological contract. So what does trust mean to you, Bob? What does trust mean to you, Sally? Because often what you'll find is that the impact and the intent are often misaligned. People maybe don't mean to do something to break or breach the trust or tear some of the conditions of the psychological contract. But if they're not aware that they're in a contract, if they're not aware what the terms and conditions are, they won't know they've broken it, and they often don't know the impact that has had. So the key, the number one takeaway for me in terms of to building trust is that it's based around relationships. It's based around fostering sustainable, empathic, adult, constructive relationships. And as part of our work here at TCM, what we're trying to do is to rebuild and maintain open, honest, respectful and trustful relationships. So hopefully you found it useful. And if there's anything that stimulated your interest in that, please do get in touch with TCM and the rest of the team. We'd be happy to continue this conversation. Thanks a lot.